Hello everyone, welcome back to Travis and Vanessa, our YouTube channel, and today I want to talk about cochlear implants versus cross-aids. And I've had experience using both of them, and that's why I wanted to make this video. I also feel that there should be more content about asymmetric hearing loss and single-sided deafness, as I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough on YouTube or social media, so that's why I wanted to bring attention to this topic. So I have more of an asymmetric hearing loss. I have a moderate loss in my right ear and pretty much deaf in my left ear, so they're about the same. And one of the ways to treat that is with cross-aids. So that's what I used first for getting a cochlear implant, and it helped me for several years, at least maybe 8 years or so. I used a cross-aid. So a cross-aid is where you'll have two hearing aids. They're a little different in their functionality, but you'll wear one in your left ear and in your right ear. And depending on which side's deaf or not, depending on the person, one hearing aid's more of a receiver of sound. So for me, this side receives sound and it sends it to my other ear, which I can hear almost normally on my right side. So this gives me the perception of hearing with both ears because it's sending sound from here to here. So then if somebody's talking to me, I could hear them, but I'm not really hearing with my left ear, I'm hearing with my right. Another interesting thing is that since I have a moderate loss in my right ear, I also has the functionality of a hearing aid where it's amplifying sound on my right ear. So it's amplified sound and then it's also receiving sound from my left. So it takes some time to get used to, but it greatly improved the quality of my life. Then, years later, I decided to get a cochlear implant. And the difference between that is that I'm not having sound being sent to my other side. I'm actually hearing with my left ear because they've put a kind of like electrode array in my cochlea, and it's sending electricity to my auditory nerve and giving me the perception of hearing. So I'm not relying on my other ear to hear. So that's the big difference between a cross-aid and a cochlear implant. And I wanted to give a list of pros and cons if, say, you're deciding if you want to get one or the other, and you're in my situation, you don't know which one's the best decision for you. So here are my list, the pros and cons of cross-aids versus cochlear implants. So cross-aid pros is that there's no surgery required. You just can put hearing aids on, you take them off and on. The sound quality is also better because you are hearing naturally from your other ear that can hear. So not saying that cochlear implants sound bad, but they're a little different and they can take some time to get used to. But a cross-aid would be immediately natural because you're hearing from a normal ear. Cross-aids are also smaller, more discreet, I would say. So because they just fit up behind your ears, cochlear implants may be a little larger in size. Kind of in comparison, the cochlear implant is larger. And with a cross-aid, there's probably not speech practice required. That's assuming that you can already understand speech with your other ear. I would say most candidates that are using cross-aids most likely can understand speech, like their hearing isn't so severe on their other ear. that they couldn't understand speech. So I would say you don't need to do as much practice with the cross-aid. So cons to cross-aids is that they can be disorienting because you lack direction, because all sound is being sent to your right ear, so you couldn't tell where sound is coming from. But to be fair, if you weren't wearing a cross-aid, you probably couldn't tell where sound was coming from anyways without it, because you need 2 ears to hear. So it's not the worst disadvantage because you were kind of already that way before, so to speak, but it's not helping to improve that problem. And it can take some getting used to. Just hearing something in your other ear when it's coming from your ear can be a little shaking you up a little bit at first if you're not used to it, but I think if you give it a couple of weeks, you will adjust and it will feel pretty normal with time, but it's going to take a little bit of adjustment. Another con is that you're relying on your right ear, or your better ear, that say your hearing decreases in the better ear, then the cross-aid won't be as effective anymore because everything's being sent to that ear. And if that ear is not working, then the cross-aid functionality is not going to be a benefit. So it's something to consider long term. It depends on what your conditions are like. But if you foresee your hearing decreasing in the other ear, then a cross-aid's not going to be helpful to you long term. And related to that, if you wait too long to have a cochlear implant surgery, your success rate will decrease because your mind and your auditory nerve needs a memory of speech and sound, and it will be able to adapt better to the cochlear implant if it's familiar with hearing. But if you wait several years without hearing in that deaf ear, it'll be harder for it to suddenly adapt to hearing again after so long of silence. So it's better to not wait an extended period of time and then decide to get a cochlear implant later. I did that to some extent, but I'm not really recommending it. And I mean, I did okay, but it probably would have been better if I hadn't waited so long to get a cochlear implant. So just something to consider. So cochlear implant pros is that you're actually hearing in your deaf ear. You're not relying on your other ear. You also have a better sense of direction because you're hearing both the left and right sides. You can tell if sounds are coming from the left side or the right side. And then you're not relying on that other ear once again. So if you potentially go deaf in your other ear, you could still hear from the left side. So you're preparing yourself for the worst. That's kind of how I felt about it, as I wasn't sure what's going to happen to my other ear. So I wanted to give myself a backup because I don't want to go deaf. So I'd rather get the surgery in my left ear so that in case anything happens to my right, I'm used to using a cochlear implant already, and that it won't be so shocking if I was to lose hearing in my right ear. I mean, I'm sure it'd still be shocking, but that was the big reason I finally decided to get a cochlear implant. So now let's talk about cochlear implant cons. Obviously, there's a surgery involved, and you'll have to do some recovery. It's not very intense. It was like maybe a week of recovery, but it's still a surgery, and that can be a little scary. I mean, it was scary to me as a kid, and now that I'm finally an adult, I think I was able to handle it better, but I think that can be pretty terrifying to children. And there's also going to be a couple months of speech practice, you're going to have to put in work to get used to your cochlear implant, and you have to keep up with it in order to improve your results. And you have to be motivated and be optimistic that it will improve. So if you don't have the motivation or the will to actually put the effort in, it may not be worth it because you're not going to get good results. So go into it being ready to practice and do all the work you need to so that it can be the best it possibly can. And related to that, it's not like you're not going to get immediate results. Crossaids has like an immediate result. Cochlear implants, it's like a slow progressive, but it may be better in the long run versus a crossaid. And then there's a potential that you might have to have another surgery in the future, depending on how long the internal parts last. I think they'll last like several years, like 10 years or something. But depending how old you are when you're getting the surgery, may need to get another one later in life, but it maybe it'll last your whole life. It probably just depends from person to person, but that's just something to consider when you're deciding if you want to get a cochlear implant or just use a crossaid. So my general summary of this is that if you care a lot about sound quality and not having a surgery, crossaids are probably better, but sound quality in cochlear implants can improve with practice and time if you're willing to put in the effort, as just something to consider. And then, but if say your hearing is decreasing in the other ear and you're looking for like a long-term help with your hearing, a cochlear implant might be a better option because you'll be hearing on the other side and it'll give you more of a backup if your other ear may begin to decrease in hearing. So those were kind of the main reasons why I decided to get a cochlear implant, and I hope this pros and cons overview was helpful to you, and thanks for watching.